There's a certain kind of person who, when they finally feel chosen, really feel it. Not just the surface warmth of being liked, but something deeper, something that reaches a part of them they didn't know was still waiting. And for a moment, everything feels like it was worth it. The waiting, the quiet years, the relationships that went nowhere. This person shows up and suddenly you're someone's entire world. That feeling, that specific, all-consuming feeling. If you know it, you really know it. Most people looking in from the outside would call it falling too fast, or being naive, or maybe even desperate. And that framing, that quiet judgment, is something you've probably already absorbed about yourself. You might have wondered why you let it happen again, why you couldn't see what others seem to see so easily. But here's what almost no one says out loud. The people who fall for intense, overwhelming affection early in a relationship are not gullible, they're not broken, and they're almost never lacking in intelligence. What they have is a nervous system and a history that made this particular kind of connection feel like the answer to something they'd been carrying for a long time. That's what love bombing actually lands on, not naivety, something far more human than that. Love bombing, if you haven't heard the term, is when someone floods another person with excessive attention, affection, compliments, and devotion, especially in the early stages of a relationship. It feels like being chosen completely. It feels like finally mattering to someone in the way you always hoped you could. And the reason it works so well on certain people specifically, goes much deeper than anyone gives it credit for. Psychologists who study attachment have found something consistent across people who are most affected by this kind of intense early connection. Many of them grew up in environments where love was conditional, unpredictable, or rationed, where affection had to be earned, where being truly seen by someone felt rare. Their nervous system learned early on to treat warmth as something precious and finite. So when it finally comes rushing in all at once, the brain doesn't see red flags, it sees relief. Neuroscience backs this up in a very specific way. When a person receives unexpected, unpredictable positive attention, the brain's dopamine system activates intensely. More intensely, in fact, than it does with consistent, reliable affection. Researchers studying reward circuits have found that intermittent and overwhelming rewards are neurologically more compelling than steady ones. The brain is essentially designed to find this kind of attention captivating. And when that attention comes wrapped in the words you most needed to hear from a person who seems to understand you entirely, the effect is close to overwhelming. This isn't weakness. It's neurochemistry colliding with personal history. And the personal history part matters just as much. Many people who respond most deeply to love bombing didn't grow up with a clear, safe model of what consistent love looked like. They may have had a parent who was loving but volatile, or present but emotionally unavailable, or simply someone who communicated affection in bursts, never steadily. The child adapts. They become attuned to emotional intensity as a signal that something real is happening. Steadiness, by contrast, can feel flat, unfamiliar, even boring. So when someone arrives and makes the world feel electric, the nervous system reads that electricity not as danger, but as depth. It's worth saying clearly, this is not a character flaw, it is adaptation. The body and the mind learned what love felt like in the environment they grew up in, and they kept looking for that feeling. There's no version of this that makes one person weaker and another stronger. People who grew up with secure, consistent attachment aren't more evolved, they're just differently calibrated. And a person calibrated for intensity isn't wrong, they're just vulnerable in a particular direction. Here is the part that surprises most people. The same sensitivity that makes someone susceptible to love bombing is often the source of their greatest depth, the capacity to feel chosen that completely, to receive another person's attention with that kind of fullness, to open that quickly and that genuinely. Those aren't liabilities dressed up as gifts, they are real gifts. People who fall hard for love bombing often love with extraordinary generosity. They see others deeply, they stay, they try. The very openness that made them a target is the same openness that makes them remarkable partners when the relationship is real. The cost is real too. When the love bombing stops, and it almost always does, the withdrawal feels physical, because in some ways it is. The dopamine patterns that formed during the intensity don't dissolve gradually, they drop. and the person is left not just with heartbreak, but with a neurological absence that can feel like grief for something that may not have ever been what it seemed. That's a specific kind of pain, and it deserves to be named specifically rather than flattened into "you should have known better." You were not wrong to want what you wanted. The longing for a love that feels total and certain and finally safe, that longing is not pathological. It is deeply, recognizably human. What happened is that someone learned how to speak directly to that longing without intending to fulfill it. And your nervous system, built for this, responded the way it was built to respond. Understanding that doesn't erase the hurt, but it does change what the hurt means. It means you are someone with a large capacity for love in a world where that capacity sometimes gets exploited before it finds where it belongs. There is nothing here that needs to be fixed. There is only something that needs to be understood. And if this felt true to something in you, if it put language to an experience you've been carrying without words, there may be more worth exploring. The same depth that draws you toward intensity also shapes the way you trust, the way you grieve, the way you stay loyal even when you shouldn't. That's a whole psychology of its own, one that when you understand it, starts to feel less like a wound and more like a map.